Hi everyone, today I'm going to explain a crime thriller called Henry's Crime. The story takes place in Buffalo, New York. Our main guy, Henry, works at a toll booth, and his life is basically the same routine every day. One morning after his night shift, Henry goes home and has breakfast with his wife, Debbie. While they're talking, Debbie brings up having a baby, but Henry kind of dodges it. Debbie asks if he still loves her. Henry says yes, but his face doesn't really match. Before they can go any further, someone knocks at the door. It's Henry's friend Eddie, and he's with a guy named Joe, who's throwing up all over the front yard. They bring Joe inside, and Debbie, who's a nurse, helps him out. Eddie tells Henry they were supposed to play baseball, but since Joe's sick, he can't make it, so Eddie asks Henry to come instead. Henry doesn't want to at first, but he ends up agreeing. Joe stays at Henry's place while Debbie looks after him. Not long after, they pull up in front of Buffalo Bank. Eddie and his friend claim they're just going to use the ATM, then they put on masks, pull out guns, and walk in to rob the bank. Henry is confused and stays in the car. A moment later, he realizes something's off, the car has been hot-wired. Then the alarm goes off. Eddie and his friend rush out and take off running. A security guard named Frank spots Henry wearing the same jersey as the robbers and tackles him. At the station, the cops realize Henry wasn't actually one of the robbers, and they ask him for the names of his friends. Henry refuses to talk. So even though he didn't do it, he ends up getting sentenced to 3 years in prison. In prison, Henry meets his cellmate Max, an ex-con. Max asks why he's in there, and Henry says he was convicted of bank robbery, but he was framed. They become friends. Max tells Henry the real crime is never going after your dreams. He says most guys in here had big dreams once, then something happened and they ended up behind bars. Max asks Henry what his dream is, and Henry says he doesn't have one. 6 months later, Debbie visits Henry and tells him she's fallen in love with someone else. Henry doesn't argue, he just tells her he hopes things go well for her. A year later, Henry is hanging out with Max and other inmates. Max says every time he has a parole hearing, he tells the parole officer that if he gets released, he'll break into his house, kill his dog, burn the place down, basically anything to make sure they never let him out. Max doesn't want to leave prison. He's accepted it as home. Later, Henry asks Max what his dream is. Max says he's already living it, staying in jail. Eventually it's Henry's turn for parole. Max tells him to behave, and says he hopes they never see each other again. Henry gets parole and is released early. He goes home and finds out Debbie is now with Joe, the guy who was puking in his yard, and she's pregnant. While Henry is grabbing his things, Joe offers him a job. It's basically a pyramid scheme, so Henry turns it down. Joe thanks him for not giving his name to the police, but Henry tells him he didn't even know his name. That night, Henry sees a TV ad featuring a woman promoting the local lottery, Buffalo. The next day, bored and not sure what to do, Henry goes back to Buffalo Bank and just stands there staring. Out of nowhere, a car hits him. The driver is a woman named Julie, and she starts calling him an idiot. Frank, the security guard, scolds Julie for driving while on the phone. Frank helps Henry over to a nearby cafe. Julie offers to take Henry to the hospital, but Frank says he's fine. Henry realizes Julie is the same woman from the lottery ad. After Julie leaves, Frank goes to the bathroom. On the wall there's an old newspaper article about a Buffalo bank robbery in the 1930s during Prohibition. A crew used an underground passageway that bootleggers used to use. The tunnel connects to the theater next door, and the gang pulled off a huge heist. Henry reads that and gets an idea. He goes back to see Max in prison and tells him his dream, rob Buffalo Bank, the same crime Henry was framed for. Henry asks for Max's help. Max thinks it's ridiculous and refuses at first, saying prison is his home. But Henry keeps pushing, telling him not to waste his life behind bars. Eventually Max rethinks it. Henry goes to the theater next door and sees Julie rehearsing a Russian play. The director is harsh and keeps ripping into her performance, and Julie gets frustrated. She notices Henry, and they go to a cafe. Henry compliments her acting, and Julie thanks him for not suing her over the accident. Meanwhile, Max goes to another parole hearing. This time, he behaves, and gets released. Henry shows up to pick him up, and Max is shocked Henry doesn't even have a car. Max gets annoyed and tries to go back to prison. Henry calms him down and tells him the bus station isn't far. They start planning the robbery. Max points out Henry's map is from 80 years ago and says the plan is risky. He asks if Henry has a gun. Henry says no, he doesn't want anyone getting hurt. They go into the bank pretending to be new customers. Max charms a bank employee into talking about the bank's history. Max says his uncle once put money in a vault here and believed the place would stand for 300 years. He asks if the vault is still in the same location. The employee says everything is, basically still in the same spot. Then they head to the theater to find the tunnel. They run into Julie again. Max tells her he used to be an actor and even performed at this theater. He bonds with a staff member named Simon and gets Simon to give them a tour. While talking, Simon lets it slip that the tunnel exit is in the lead actor's dressing room, even though it was sealed back in 1931. Max offers to volunteer at the theater, and Simon happily agrees. Henry and Julie keep talking. Julie asks if Max is Henry's dad. Henry says no. She asks what Henry does, and Henry tells her he was just released from prison. Henry asks her out to dinner after rehearsal, and she says yes without pressing him for details. That night, Henry gets ready, goes to the restaurant, and Julie shows up late and stressed. She says she's tired of Buffalo and plans to move to Hollywood after the play to pursue acting. She asks why Henry went to prison, and Henry explains he thought he was going to play baseball but got framed. Then he tells her he's planning to rob the bank for real this time. Julie is shocked, and kind of amused. After dinner, they go back to Julie's place. She has Henry read the script and practice lines. She asks him to try the lead role, and Henry does surprisingly well. Things move quickly, and they end up sleeping together that night. The next day, Henry brings Julie to his place. Max doesn't notice her at first and blurts out details about the robbery. Max panics, but Henry says Julie already knows everything and won't tell anyone. Max gets mad Henry told her, but Henry calms him down by making him bacon. Max starts volunteering at the theater and realizes they need access to the lead actor's dressing room to reach the sealed tunnel without anyone noticing. Max suggests getting the lead actor out and putting Henry in, but Henry says he can't act. Then the lead actor suddenly quits because he's been offered a bigger role somewhere else. The director and the cast are furious. Max jumps on the opportunity and pressures Julie to recommend Henry. Julie refuses at first, saying Henry has never acted. Max keeps pushing and admits it would help with the robbery. Julie realizes Max has been maneuvering things, but she reluctantly agrees to recommend Henry. The director doesn't want Henry, but he gives him an audition. It starts off terrible, then Henry finds his footing and ends up crushing it. Everyone's impressed, and Henry gets cast as the lead, which gives him access to the dressing room and the tunnel route. Henry and Max break through the dressing room wall and find the tunnel sealed off. It's too much work for just the two of them, so they decide to recruit someone. They go to Joe. Joe is in a bad place because his pyramid scheme collapsed and he can't support Debbie and the baby. They offer him a role in the heist, and Joe agrees immediately. Over the next few days, the trio digs out the tunnel while Henry also trains hard for the play. One night as they're leaving the theater, Frank suddenly appears and stops them. He says he's been watching since he first noticed them at the bank, and he's seen them hanging around the theater. Frank admits he suspects they're planning a robbery, but he doesn't want to report them. He wants in. Frank explains that once a month, an armored truck collects cash from partner branches and brings it to the vault, sometimes $8 to $12 million at a time. He offers to be their inside man and help bypass security and disable the alarm. They think it could be a trap and ask Frank why he's doing this. Frank tells them years ago his wife got seriously sick, and despite his decades working at the bank didn't help him. He spent his retirement savings on treatment, but she still died. Frank is retiring in 2 weeks, and he wants money to secure his future. The group accepts his story and agrees to bring him in. Back at the theater, rehearsal continues, but the director keeps going after Julie, saying she isn't showing emotion. He tells her she's never loved anyone and doesn't understand feelings. Julie breaks down and walks off. Henry follows her. Julie says people always call her cold. Henry tells her she isn't, and he kisses her. That night, Henry and Max are prepping when someone knocks at the door. Henry opens it and sees Joe, along with Eddie. Joe got drunk and talked, and now Eddie wants in on the heist. Max tries to brush him off, saying there's no plan, but Eddie doesn't buy it. They argue and nearly fight. Henry steps in and reluctantly agrees to include Eddie. The next day, Henry gets to the theater and finds out the opening night has been moved up, to the same night as the robbery. That puts him in a bind, because he's the lead and the show can't happen without him. Max reminds Henry he's the one who pulled Max out of prison for this job, so he can't back out now. That night, Henry tells Julie they have to rob the bank on opening night, which means Henry will be leaving right after. Julie gets furious, especially because Henry is now the lead and the play collapses without him. She thinks Henry used her to get access to the theater. Henry insists that's not true and tries to convince her to meet him in California afterward. Julie refuses and tells him to do what he's going to do. Opening night finally arrives. The theater is chaotic with premiere prep. At the bank, the cash truck arrives and deposits the money in the vault. Frank gives them the signal. Henry keeps performing, but whenever he finishes a scene, he rushes off to help. Max goes through the tunnel with Joe and Eddie to do the job. Joe starts throwing up again. Eddie, who knows his way around tools, uses welding equipment to get into the vault. They get the vault open and start grabbing money. Everything is going smoothly. They load cash into sacks and carry it back into the dressing room. Then Eddie shows who he really is. He pulls a gun on Max and tells him to step aside. He orders Joe to load all the money into the car so they can take off. Joe begs him to stop, saying they already have their share. Eddie refuses. Henry walks in, and Eddie threatens him too, then smacks Max with the gun. Max gets back up, disarms Eddie, and the two struggle. During the fight, the gun goes off and hits Henry in the leg. Max knocks Eddie down and leaves him tied up and gagged in the tunnel. The rest of them load the money into the car and drive off. But on the way, Henry suddenly tells them to stop. He says he has to go back to the theater. Joe doesn't get it, but Max does, and he tells Henry to go. Henry returns to the theater and interrupts the play, bleeding from his leg. He declares his love for Julie in front of everyone. The audience is stunned at first, but because it also lines up with the story of the play, they get pulled in. Julie tells Henry to leave, but Henry won't. He keeps asking her to meet him in Moscow. The crowd starts cheering for Julie to say yes. The director is intrigued, drops the lights, and pushes Julie to answer. Julie doesn't say yes out loud, but she smiles, and that's her answer.